Hello, Rajani. How are you? My name is Juan, and in today's video, I'm going to show you my solution to the Docker project, the second part of it. And yeah, so let's begin. I'm going to show you some of the screenshots that I took, and also I'm going to show you the functionality of the application so that you can understand it in a better way. So the first point is just the put endpoint. As you can see here, okay, just so you know before, I'm using Express and Next.js. So yeah, this is just the routing that is used in Express. Um, in this endpoint, it's just to update a user. It goes to the API, the routing the API user slash ID. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna show you later on a modification that I did to this endpoint so that it handles some errors as well. So yeah, this is just the first one. Um, I also had to do another endpoint, which is get a user by ID. So for example, as you can see here, I have a list with all the students that I have added to my database. The point of adding this endpoint is that if I want to update a user, such as, I don't know, let's say this one, it goes here by the user's ID. So all this information is fetched because um, because it went to the database with the ID of this certain user. It searched for a specific record, and then it returned all the data from that specific user. I also added here my front end Docker file. For the first part of this project, I wasn't able to get it. So I made some modifications. So this Docker file is different than the one that I submitted for part one. Same with the backend Docker file. This one was like the one that I had a lot of problems with in the first submission. But here it's working perfectly. Like I think I started to understand how it works. For this submission, I used Docker Compose just to be able to run those containers. As you can see here, I have three containers. So the first one is Mongo, which is the database that I'm using. The second one is the backend, and the third one is the front. Here, I just list whatever dependencies my containers are going to need to be able to run. So for example, here, Mongo needs the username, my password, the ports it's going to run on, and yeah, some other stuff as well. Okay, for this point, the question is just asking us how to run the application. Um, it's very simple, to be honest. I just have to run the server folder first. So I execute this command, npm run dev. This is basically just this API. So let's say that I want to get all these users. This is just a JSON, which is going to be then translated to a student list, as you can see here. After I run my server folder, I can run my client folder, which is basically this page. So this one is the server and this one is the client. So that's it for that one. And well, yeah, this is just how to run the application. Perfect. So here we also just had to include uh, how we compile and how did we deploy the application to a container. So once again here, I put my Docker files as it was expected. Um, okay, also, something that I mentioned here is to be able to run these containers, we need some environment variables such as the port number, which is 3000 or 5000, and the Mongo URI. This URI is just where my database is located. So if I want my container to be able to communicate with that database, it is going to need this URI. Then is same thing again, the docker.compose file. Um, and yeah, that's basically it. Okay, once we have those files set it up, we will build our containers with the following command, docker compose build. The output is going to look something similar to this. So for example, here first, uh, as you can see, the Mongo database is what is built first, then is the backend, and then is the frontend. It is made in this order because my backend depends on my database and my frontend depends on my backend. So that's the way it's built. And to be able to actually run those containers, we'll use this command. This command will run all the Docker images at the same time. However, there is another command called docker compose run, I believe, which allows you to run those containers separately. But for the purpose of the application, we'll just run all the Docker images at the same time. This is what the output looks like. So as you can see here, my Mongo container is the one who's that run first, then goes to the backend, and then here the front end just tells me where can I navigate to be able to display that page. Um, let's see what is here. Okay, this was just to test the connection with the database. So first, what I did was list all the containers that we were running at the time. So yeah, I have the three containers, which is front and back end and Mongo. Mongo is the one that I want to be able to manipulate to communicate with the database. I created a database network connection just to be able to communicate with them. Um, then uh, I'll go to the Mongo container shell to run those commands that are gonna allow me to see the users that are in my database via the command line. So the first thing that I had to do here was authenticate my user. This is just my username and the password that I have set it up for this project. As you can see here, the response is okay, it's affirmative, it's positive. After that, uh, okay, this question is asking us to select the users from the database. So here, once I am already authenticated, I'll go to my database, I'll go to the collection users, and I'll just, print every user. At that time, I just had one user, so that's why I just have one display. But as you can see here, I have an object ID, which is the one that Mongo assigns to the user, an ID that it's the one that I write here, my name, my course, and the date. That's all for that one. And the postman. So here you are attempting to do post requests. However, uh, the first one will try to post a new student with an existing ID. So as you can see here, this is the JSON that I sent. ID 123, my name, ta ta ta. And the response from the server was that the user with this ID already exists. So it does not allow me to create a new user. However, if I try to create a new user, if I send a post request with a different ID, my response is just a JSON with, the object ID and all those attributes that are automatically added to Mongo. Um, okay. Um, my computer is set it up to Spanish. Um, for some reason, I haven't been able to change it to English. But this is about the CPU scheduling. So here it's just Windows. Unfortunately, it's in Spanish, but it's the same logic. So these were the uh, Docker processes running at the time. So here are three containers, the Mongo, the backend, and the frontend. The other process that is running is this desktop, the Docker desktop UI. So for example, this one is one of my containers. I could establish the priority to be high, to be normal, to be low, etc. And same thing for Ubuntu. So although for some reason I couldn't get Ubuntu to display like the names of my containers for some reason, the PID uh, was the same um, for those containers. So yeah, it was the same thing here. I had to install some dependencies to be able to display a list like this. So that's for Ubuntu. For the deployment to Azure, I don't know. I didn't do this point because first it was optional. It didn't affect any marks, and I wasn't able. I tried to use my Gmail account. It didn't work. It told me that I had to like pay or something. I'm gonna double check it once again with one of my Microsoft accounts, but with the Gmail account, I wasn't able. And I also tried to do it with the Sade account, and it told me that I didn't have the permissions to do it. So I wasn't able. I spent a lot of time trying to to figure this out, but I wasn't able. So um, that part was not completed. Here are the tasks. So once again, we are going back to the boot endpoint. This is what I'm talking about. I added some error handling to be able to uh, trigger a HTTP response 404 if the student ID was not found. So although we won't have that problem because to be able to update a user, you'll have to click on one of these. But just in the case that we send a put request with an ID that does not exist, my code will handle that as well. Um, okay, so for example, I didn't put any screenshots of my code here, but I can show you the functionality. So as we can see here, we're gonna attempt to update one of these students. So ID 123. I'm gonna send a request from Postman. So as you can see here, ID 123, update user, ta ta ta. And I just changed the name here. So instead of Juan Nova, it's gonna be updated user. And the server response was okay because all the data was right. So going back to the code, this is what I'm talking about. So it's gonna trigger a response of 404 if the student ID was not found in the database, and therefore the user won't be updated because, well, there is no student with that ID. So that's all for that part. Um, let's see. Okay, this is the server response, updated user. Okay, now to be able to deploy two containers of my RESTful API, we'll use a different command than the one that was used before, which was docker compose app. So first of all, we'll create a network to be able to share the data between those containers in the same network. Um, Here, I'm just running two containers of my RESTful API with different ports. So for example, here I'm running the first instance of my RESTful API with a port of 5000. And then here I'm running uh, the second instance of my RESTful API with the port of 5001. So yeah, I just get an ID here that belongs to my containers. Here is just the Docker desktop uh, displaying those two containers running. And now here on the CPU scheduling on Windows 10 on my host machine, I can see those two processes running. This is the PID of those processes. So yeah, for the first example, I set it both of the CPU priorities to hide, just to see if there was any notorious change in the CPU usage. So this was before. This was before setting that up to hide. As you can see here, the average use was set to 6%. It maintained an average CPU usage, I would say. There is a peak here that probably didn't have to do anything with my containers at all. And this was just after setting that up to hide. The difference wasn't really notorious. I don't know why. It just increased in 1% in average. Um, so yeah, that was for my host machine. However, When I did that in Ubuntu, this is what happened. Okay, so first of all, I had to install HTOP, which was the dependency that will display that CPU usage and all those processes. Here I can see all the processes. Um, Here I just found those containers by its name. So I searched backend. Then I found those two processes by its PVID. Um, okay. Then for both of those containers, I used this command, sudo renit. And what this command did was to set the priority for those two containers to hide. So for example, this was my CPU usage before setting the priorities to hide. So as you can see here, uh, the average was just 2.0%. And after I set the priorities to hide, it increased to 27%. So my hypothesis of the reason why it increased a lot in my VM, but it didn't increase a lot on my host machine, was because the CPU allocated for my VM is lower than the CPU allocated in my host machine. My VM didn't have too many CPU cores allocated at that time, so I will say that's the reason why it increased in a significant way. That was my theory. And once again, the Azure, I just wasn't able to do it, and it was optional, so I decided not to take part in that one. This was my reference. I used it for answering some of the CPU scheduling questions, and that's it. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.